The one thing I did with the second edition, not only are there hiking descriptions, but there's also descriptions of the other amenities at every location, every hike's location. Also, I contacted the key people in each location, the park rangers, the biologists, the conservationists, whoever kind of was most knowledgeable about the trails and the park. And I had them vet all of the information. I had them take a look at the information that I wrote about the synopsis. I had them take a look at the maps and the trail information and all of the biology and the topography and the history. It's not just me contributing to this guide. It's park rangers and staff that are on these trails every single day.
Welcome back to the 10 Adventures podcast. Today we're talking about one of my favorite topics, places that aren't really well known, the opposite of Instagram famous. For today's podcast, we're talking hiking in Texas. And here to tell us all about it is Dan Klepper, a Texas native and author of the newly published second edition of 100 Classic Hikes in Texas, put out by Mountaineer Books. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Richard. Thank you for having me.
So before we talk about hiking in Texas, I'm really interested in your background because it's so diverse. And, you're almost a bit of a Renaissance man. You're an acclaimed artist. Your art's all over Texas. You're an author in magazines and books in fiction and nonfiction. You're also an outdoor adventurer writing this classic book of all these great hikes. How did you find this path in life?
I was born and raised in Texas, and I worked on my undergraduate in art at the University of North Texas. And during my coursework, I learned about some experimental video and the video technology that goes along with it. So it was a relatively new part of, art curricula. I was interested in that and decided to continue to pursue it. So I moved to Chicago, which had a very lively, growing time arts community, and created an experimental portfolio of video art and submitted it to the School of the Art Institute and was accepted into their video art department, their video art program. And they had, at the time, and I guess they still do, they had a work study, financial aid program. So they brought me into that. So that helped me pay for my education. And I completed my master's degree and created experimental video works for quite a number of years. During the 80s and 90s, this work was distributed by the Video Data Bank, which specializes in time arts and video and digital art distribution for artists. But there really wasn't any money in it at the time. And so I returned to Texas, and I was determined to make a go of being an artist here. And so, as most artists know, it's a challenge to make a living as an artist. And so I had spent much of my past paying the bills by working labor jobs in landscaping and construction, and then going to a studio all night. And I knew that really wasn't a sustainable lifestyle. And so when I moved back to Texas, I figured that I needed to find another way. So I took several non-labor jobs, including I worked from a home office for an art publishing company. And I also got a job as a part-time park ranger in one of the state parks. So that really got me, being a part-time park ranger really did kind of send me into the direction of, this is a long way around of getting to the answer to your question, but it is complicated. So at that time, I didn't have a studio, so I started writing as a creative outlet. I managed to get a book contract for this book concept that I put together with one of the artists that I was actually working with the publishing company. And in my naivety, I created this book package, and I needed a writer. And so I had selected a writer. And then when the guy found out that there was no money involved, then, but the publisher was still interested, I decided, well, I've been writing and I'll just fake it. And so I created a pseudonym and submitted the book package to this New York publisher, and they took it. They bought it. So it was really my first, foray into publishing. And, it's like pure dumb luck. I mean, you can write for half your life and submit stuff and never, get anybody to pay attention to it. And here was this fancy New York publisher, and they wanted to publish a book. So they did. I understood that that these things actually could happen and you could actually make money at it. And so I thought, well, in order to make money and pay the bills and not really have to have like a real day-to-day job where I have to go somewhere, I could combine writing and photography, which I had always done, and kind of pitch stories to magazines. And so I started doing that. And early on, I scored a nice contract that was more money than, it was only couple of $1,000s, but it was more money than, I usually make in a month. And I thought, hey, this might really work. So I continued to do that. And that allowed me to continue to create art without having to deal with monetizing it. It really allowed me to develop, the style and the kind of work that I wanted to do that was still experimental without thinking, well, how do I get this sold and who's going to buy it? This whole time I'm selling, magazine pitches and photographs. And so I literally just kind of built that career. And I specialized in, because I was outdoors already and I was, a part-time park ranger at the time, and I really liked being outdoors. And I thought, well, that'll be my gig, that'll be my wheelhouse would be camping, hiking, mountain biking, and the outdoors and wildlife and all that kind of stuff. So I thought, well, that'll be what I do. So I specialized in that. At some point, I guess Mountaineers Books, who published the guide, they wanted to break into the Texas market. And so I guess I'm assuming it was quite a while ago, because remember, this is the second edition. The first edition came out like 15 years ago. So they called around to different Texas publishers for magazines and said, hey, do you know this guy, or do you know anybody that would be a good person to write and photograph this guidebook, because we want to break into the Texas market? And so I had a couple of editors that I had been working with who said, yeah, there's this Klepper guy, and we published some of his articles, and he does a lot of freelance for us, and so he's got the time to do the hikes and to do the work. And so that's kind of how that career came about. Ultimately, I moved out to West Texas because I'd been in Central Texas, and thought, well, now's the time. I just need to open a studio where I can go there every day and I can, do my freelance work, but I can also make my art and then have people come and see it. I thought, okay, well, I'll give this business like 3 years maximum. And if it works, this is great. But in 3 years, I'll know if I, run out of money and, then I'm have to do something else. And that was about 25 years ago. So today I make a living selling my art. So that's predominantly what I do. I don't really do any freelance anymore, except on special projects like this guidebook. And I also have a gallery that represents my work in Houston. So that's kind of how that came about and where I am now.
What a great journey of just kind of like serendipity. In researching about the book and about yourself, I noticed your dad was the outdoor editor of the San Antonio Express News for almost 40 years. And I wonder, did that influence your career and your life in any way?
He was a true outdoorsman, fishing, hunting, camping, wildlife. That was his career. And that was what he grew up doing. And he was able to turn it into this, career in journalism for almost 50 years before he passed away. And so I grew up in that environment. And so as I, became an adult, I recognized photography and writing was a real thing. It wasn't like a dream job. People did it for a living because my father did. So I never really questioned that, like how, this is just uh, a fantasy that people have. It was just a real job, and there were ups and downs, just like any other job. So it was really he was like proof of concept. So I always had that idea in the back of my head, which is probably why I thought it was going to be, an easy breezy thing to be a fine artist and make a living, as a fine artist, because people utilize their creativity to create a long career. It was a lot more difficult than I thought, but ultimately, I really hadn't considered doing writing and photography as a career. It was just kind of a means to an end, but it was there when I needed it. And it kind of gave me him succeeding in it and spending his entire career doing it kind of gave me the confidence to tackle it when I needed to do it. Also, my mom is a biologist. We spent most of, our, time as a family out in the field. We were camping or fishing or in the outdoors. And so it was pretty remarkable to be in the field with this, veteran outdoorsman and a biologist at the same time. So we really learned, we were exposed to the natural world, I think, in a pretty exceptional way.
Do you remember your first hike, with these two kind of incredible teachers, essentially? What do you remember of that?
I actually was rummaging through some stuff and came up with a magazine. My father shot the cover, and if you can see this, and wrote a story in this. This is now Texas Parks and Wildlife magazine. It used to be called Texas Game and Fish. And he wrote he did some freelance as well. And he wrote a story about us camping. And that was probably one of the first memories of the whole family going together. So in my father's work, he met a lot of landowners, a lot of ranchers. They became friends. And so we spent most of our time when we would be on the outdoors on a ranch someplace. And, Texas is like 96% privately owned. So that's not unreasonable to think about the fact that you're going to be outdoors. Maybe somebody has a ranch. It's not that uncommon in Texas. And so most of our time, we were on private land. But then I thought, well, what it was the first time that we were on public lands that other people can. And this trip was probably it. So we went as a family. I don't know if you can see this. So that's my little sister, right? Like she's 18 months. And so she was old enough to go camping. So we all were taken outdoors when we were little babies, right? And so my parents had this crib that it was like a wooden mesh crib. It's right here. It's got a little shade over the top of it, but see if you can see that. It's got a little shade over the top of it, but it's literally a crib. It's like a cage. So it's got a top on it, and you lift it and you put the baby in and you close it. And it's got legs and it's up off the ground. So, your baby is, the baby is safe. And so all three of us children took turns during our toddler years sleeping in that crib when we were camping. And so after my youngest sibling was born, you had to wait a little while before, they could take her camping too. So this was the first trip where she was old enough and sleeping in the little outdoor crib. The rest of us got to sleep in sleeping bags by that time, right? In the tents. And, but this was in Big Bend National Park. So my father had this assignment where it was like, spend a week camping with your family, hiking, being outdoors for $50. See how far you can get for $50. This was, quite some time ago. And so we went to Big Bend National Park. So that was probably the first hike. I mean, we were little kids, so the hikes weren't rigorous by any stretch of the imagination. And then we went to the Davis Mountains. So we went to a couple of places in far west Texas where I live now. So that was kind of the first hike that we did on public land, I would say, in a park.
In researching this book, you've hiked all over Texas, and Texas is also one of those places that locals, I've heard them say, it's a bit of a gem. People are sleeping on this. What do you think makes hiking in Texas so great?
It's diverse. The diversity of wildlife is really amazing, and so is the topography. I mean, you can cross it in a day in a vehicle, but that means that you'll go from like mountains, like desert mountains, that are maximum 7,000 and 8,000 feet elevation, and then you can be at the end of the day you can be on the beach, on the coast, or you can go from swampy East Texas, heavily forested country to the prairies. So it just encompasses a huge range of topography, of biology. It's got over 600 species of birds. People come from all over the country to, the birders do. And in order to fill out, birders have these life lists that they make, and they want to see how many birds that they can see before they, the end of their birding life. And so Texas is really a key place for a lot of these birders to come and get a whole bunch of these birds that they want on their list before, and it takes a lot of traveling around, but Texas has all of these birding trails that you can take, and parks and websites. They keep track of what birds, people are seeing that day. So it's not unusual for a bird, enthusiast to see that, they live on the coast, but there's a rare sighting of a, warbler in the mountains, and they'll drive the 8 hours it takes to go and see this bird in somebody's backyard. So it's a pretty, intense and diversified area. I think there's that. I think also that, we have big predators, unlike in the western, in the Rockies, or we don't have grizzlies, but we do have black bears. I occasionally, when I'm hiking on a trail out in Big Bend, it's not uncommon today to see a black bear. And we do have mountain lions. These lions are they're pretty fierce, and it's not something that you want to come across, but it's really neat to see them. It's neat to see for some people, it's neat to see their footprint, their prints, paw prints on the trails, either following you or right ahead of you, and you have to take some precautions for that. And we also have alligators. I mean, the alligator is an animal you need to pay attention to at different places, but they're really neat to see. You can get, you can see them. It's a pretty routine to see them in certain parts of the Texas. So, it's got varied climate. Mostly that climate is hot, but there are long stretches of the year that you can be outdoors, and it's pleasant, and so you can pretty much hike all year round. You can always find some place to go hiking. Texas has national parks, it has national forests, it has a national seashore, it has dozens of state parks, it has national wildlife refuge areas, for different kinds of migratory birds and wildlife. And so there are a lot, and all of those places have trails. So it's, it's a pretty varied place to go hiking.
With all this variety and with the size of Texas, I wonder if you can maybe break down a few of the great areas people can go to and find a weekend or a week of hiking. whether it's a national park, a state park, a national forest, anything, but like help them consider where in the state they should consider for an upcoming vacation.
Texas is usually broken down into like 7 to 10 regions, and that's how I've done the hiking guide. Is I've broken them down into those regions, and that breakdown you'll see repeated in a lot across the state when you're talking about Texas topography or the state parks or the national parks or you know biology, whatever you're looking up. Typically, across the board, Texas uses this system to divide the state, and it's because the regions are just so varied that it's just helpful to identify these huge sections of Texas and describe them to by their topography or their. And so you've got, of course, the Big Bend country where most people go. People come from all over the country to go to the Big Bend region, and it's kind of the boot heel of Texas, and it goes from all the way from the southern end of the boot heel that borders Mexico to all the way to the northern end of the boot heel, which borders New Mexico. And it's a line mostly along a line of mountain ranges. These are high desert mountain ranges. They're not the tail end of the Rockies. They're a separate part of a ridge that runs north and south in along the continent, and they're predominantly arid, and it's just people's, especially in Texas, it's everybody's favorite place to go. It's big country. The trails are rugged. It's really, an outdoor experience. And then above that, or to the east of that, you have the Panhandle Plains, which are these elevated prairies. It's really the southern end of the great prairies of the continent. And some of that still exists. Some of that survives. Some of the native grasslands and some of the native prairie environments still survive, and they're conserved. And so you can get a sense of what that country looked like 100 years ago, when you had Native American tribes dominating it, and then you had cattlemen coming in and ranching it. So you also have a region they call prairies and lakes, and it's literally woodlands, grasslands, but it's just a lot of lots and lots of lakes, lots of rivers, lots of lakes. It's very, very pastoral. And then you have in the East Texas, you have what's called the Piney Woods, and that is a region, heavily forested region of national forest state parks, and it's more populated. Everything is a little bit. Parks are somewhat smaller. Lots of places to fish. Alligators, and swamps like the Big Thicket, which is a nationally designated region of unique species like the uh, carnivorous pitcher plant. I'm sure everybody's seen those plants that look like little pitchers, and the bug, kind of an insect, comes flying around, and that's what these are. So you can you can take a hike and see these growing, naturally in some of the places there. And then, of course, you have this Gulf Coast region, which is pretty vast. It covers the entire coastline, Gulf of Mexico coastline of Texas. And there's a lot, it's beaches, it's estuaries, it's wetlands. It encompasses an enormous amount of different diversified environments. And then you've got all of South Texas, which is the valley where kind of the entire state kind of drains into this. And this area is affected frequently by hurricanes as well as the Gulf Coast. And it's just kind of a low brushy uh, region that's vast, and it harbors things like the endangered ocelot. A large population of mountain lions are there. Uh, and it's an interesting place, huge birding mecca. For birds, migratory birds, they love this area because there's just a lot of brush that they can, you know, nest and fledge and migrate through. And then lastly, you have this area called the hill country. And the hill country is full of limestone canyons, woody escarpments, and some species. Like many other regions in Texas, you'll find species that you'll never find anyplace else on the planet.
Is there a go-to place? Big Bend, everyone knows about that. Is there a place that you think is extra special that maybe isn't going to be as well known as Big Bend National Park?
Well, Big Bend National Park is well traveled and well known. That isn't a good reason not to go, because it is this, it's 800,000 acres. Of course, it's not for people who hike in Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. These places are probably pretty small. Any other state that has a lot of public lands, even New Mexico, where I actually hike a lot, love it because there's a lot of federal lands that are open to, and they're they're huge. They're in Texas because it's privately, most of it is privately owned, like I said. Then our hiking opportunities are limited to these state parks or the national parks. And so even though the 800,000 acres sounds relatively small for somebody who lives and hikes in Colorado, it's also surrounded by these vast ranches where nobody lives. So even though you can't access them, they are, part of the encompassing, viewshed that you have. And so less traveled is Big Bend Ranch State Park, which is next to it. It's over 300,000 acres. It is a very, even though it's still arid, low mountains, it's also where a tremendous amount of volcanic activity occurred, millions of years ago, but it's evident everywhere. And part of what it created are these canyons, just dozens and dozens of desert canyons that still hold water. So unlike Big Bend National Park, where your surface water is relatively limited, other than the Rio Grande that borders it up front on the south, in Big Bend Ranch State Park has over 100 seeps and springs within its designated area. And so I always found that it's somewhat less complicated to backpack through that state park if you know what you're doing, and you have the topos, and you pay attention to them, and you're cautious. You can find water along your route, unlike in the national park, where many of these trails, you're not going to find water at all. And it's just the topography. It's just the way the topography ended up. And so the Big Bend Ranch State Park is one of those places where it really is a challenge that you really have to be prepared to tackle some of the trails there and some of the routes, because you can, with the right topographic map, you can just simply start in a canyon and see how far you can get. So, and I like to do that. And I've included one of those hikes in the guide, because in a canyon, you really as long as you got sides on one side and the other canyon side on the other side, then you really can't get lost, and unless you're, of course, you're a complete idiot. But if you just stay in the canyon, you always know where you are. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there are side canyons, and you have to. That's where your map comes in. It's like, oh well, I don't want to go there, or maybe this would be a good place to camp. But if I just keep heading, in this channel, you know, then I know where I am. And so in Big Bend Ranch State Park, you can do that, but you have to be prepared. You really do. The Big Bend also has, like you mentioned, Palo Duro Canyon State Park. They bill it as like the second largest state park, but the reality is that much of that acreage is not accessible to the public. It's heavily visited. It has a lot of weird geology that's a lot of fun. You can do a lot of mountain biking there as well if you like to mountain bike. There's a lot of mountain biking in a lot of the state parks, not so much in the national park, as you're really restricted to gravel roads. But in state parks, they have designated mountain biking trails. So if you're a big mountain biker and a hiker, then a lot of the state parks offer both, and it's really great riding. I mean, it's if you like mountain biking, I like it because I'm short, and so I don't have a long way to fall over when I'm on my mountain bike trying to tackle something. So, and then Guadalupe Mountains is a whole different topography. It has the tallest mountain in Texas, and you can climb. You can take it. There's a trail that goes all the way to the top of that. Views are spectacular. You really do see the bend in the earth. It's not flat. It's not flat. It's curved, and it's a strenuous hike, but people love doing it because it's just something that's on their list, and they want to be at the tallest, the highest place in Texas.
I remember having friends that were living in Texas, and they'd send me photos in winter while we're knee deep in snow here in the Rocky Mountains of hiking in short sleeves. For people that are looking for an active escape from winter, where would you suggest they look for some hikes that are going to be, they don't have to be short sleeves, but things you can do in kind of the December to March time period?
Out in the mountainous region where I live, oftentimes the winters are pretty balmy. I mean, it's a hit and miss, really, for winters in Texas. It's pretty much always going to be cold in the northern parts. Up in the Panhandle Plains, there's nothing to stop the wind. It comes out of where you are, and it just barrels south, and so it's really frigid, and it's not really a lot of fun. Some people like hiking in it. I have hiked in it before, but not with any great joy because I don't like being cold. But out in the mountainous region, you can hit a day that's, the high is going to be in the 70s, and it's just like a beautiful, beautiful day to do a mountain hike. But you have to be aware that as soon as that sun drops behind that canyon wall or behind that mountain, it's going to get cold. And if you're camping at night and you're camping in the wintertime, you want to be prepared because it does get cold. And then occasionally there are these northers that blow through. They're kind of a surprise, and because Texas is so large and it's so varied, there's not only, weather that occurs over a region, but you have these microclimates too, where the mountain range that you happen to be in has a fluctuation in temperature or moisture or rainfall that is different than what's happening 20 miles away. So you just kind of have to really be prepared that way for that. But definitely winter hiking in the Big Bend, winter hiking in South Texas, is always pretty, rarely do they get a freeze down there. So it's going to be pleasant. And if you're looking for wintering birds to add to your list, then that's a good place to go. It's somewhat tropical there, and can be really balmy. Um, the Texas coast has a reputation for relaxing and warm, and then suddenly it's just really cold and miserable and windy, and so you just kind of have to watch the weather. Yeah, and you have to be prepared. I mean, if you're making plans weeks in advance, you just want to be prepared to kind of tackle whatever comes your way. But it's not going to be blizzard. There won't be any blizzards like you experience.
Talking about the dangers of weather and being preparedness, you also mentioned earlier having a topo map to make sure you don't get lost. And something I almost never think about is water, because there's even in the hottest summers, there's always, a river that's still flowing that's, at some point on the route, or a lake that I can get water from. But what are some of the unique hiking dangers in Texas that may not be expected for people who are used to hiking in, the mountains or the West Coast?
The number one thing that you want to watch out for is heat. Even during the wintertime, people have suffered from heat exhaustion, which turns into, heat stroke and hyperthermia, and it will kill you. And it happens every year in Texas that someone succumbs to heat. They're hiking at the heat of the day. They don't expect it to be this hot. It doesn't feel that hot because maybe it's a dry heat, and suddenly they're kind of overcome by heat. There's not a lot of shade, especially in West Texas, and so there's not really any place where you can kind of take a respite and gather your wits. So heat is like the number one thing. You just don't want to be hiking in the middle of the afternoon when it's really hot. And you certainly don't want to be doing that in the summertime. The other thing is people just run out of water. They just don't take enough water. And I see this all the time on the trail. Families have these little kids, and each of them is carrying a little, plastic bottle of water that they got at the, Stop and Shop on their way when they got some gas. And that's all this, 6-year-old has to drink. And it's really dangerous for the kids and the parents to not be carrying extra water, or just being prepared enough to take your kid on a trail. But I see it all the time, and for the most part they make it back. But I've been on the trail a couple of times where you have like Boy Scout troops with troop masters that just aren't prepared for it. They think this hike is going to be easy because it's like 2 miles, and we'll be done by lunchtime. And I see them going la, 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 and then I see them coming back, and they're like, "Oh, that kid is like too red." Hold on, kid. Let me pour some water over you because you are not in good shape. Typically, what I'll do is I'll just call a park ranger and say, "Hey, you need to keep an eye on, make sure these guys get back because they're in bad shape." And it's because they didn't anticipate the heat. Suddenly it's 90 degrees, and you've been walking for an hour in full sun, even though it's 80 degrees, but suddenly, boom, it's 90 degrees, and suddenly your body can't regulate temperature, and you're in a bad way. It's happened to me. It's happened. I'm an experienced hiker, and more than once I'm like, it's not too bad, and then about an hour later I'm like, oh, this is not, this is not good at all. And so it takes an hour or a couple of hours sometimes to like get in the shade and put some water on you, wet your bandana, and like you just have to chill and cool off and cool down in the shade, preferably with a lot of cool water. And you just have to wait until your body, you have to listen to your body when that situation happens. And kids can't do that. So, it's the adult's responsibility to make sure the kid is doing the right thing. You never want to put anybody in a tent when they're overcome with heat exhaustion, because that'll kill them. And it has happened. It's happened. So those are the two things that, of course, then there's also rattlesnakes, which there are 10 different species in Texas. So you just have to be really snake aware, more so than any big predator, unless you're swimming in someplace that has alligators. That, if it says alligators, no swimming, don't swim. Don't even wade. You want to do that. But you really do have to be careful of rattlesnakes, because, they're everywhere. And so you just have to keep an eye out. And if you're hiking with your dog, keep him on a leash, make sure he's got, he's been trained to be snake smart. They do that. And also there's a anti a venom vaccine, a rattlesnake vaccine that you can get for your dog. And a lot of vets in Texas, they offer that, and they'll give, if you're always hiking with your dog, or you live in an area where out in the country or something, in a rural area where you're just bound to see rattlesnakes because they are part of the population, then you can get your dog vaccinated, and it does help. I've had a couple of dogs bitten, and it's not, they survive, but it's not pleasant at all. So it does help.
And then finally, you have this, let's get it up here. You've got this great book. There's 100 hikes in here. If you had a friend coming into town who had never been hiking in Texas, is there one hike you'd take him or her to show them, hey, this is what Texas hiking's all about?
Yeah, I thought about your question. I actually get that question a lot. Like, what's your favorite hike? And it really is difficult to pick a favorite. It really depends on the season. It depends on the location and where it is. And it also depends on what's happening that day. Like, is there a storm coming in and I want to get some lightning shots, or, is it going to be cloudy? So it'll be perfect, hiking. So I don't, I have to worry about shade, or do I want to end up swimming? Do I want to take a dip in a river, or in a spring, in a creek? Is there water in the creek? I love wild swimming. And so anything that has a water in it, or a river, a creek, I'll get in it. I don't hesitate. And as long as there's no alligators. And so it really depends on that. So there's just, for me, and that's not true for, I guess, for a lot of, for me, there's like too many factors to pick just one. So that's why I included 100 in the hiking guide.
It makes sense, because you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's really hot, you got to do something different. If it's going to be a storm rolling in, you got to change your mind. And also, maybe your friend's a terrible hiker. Maybe your friend can only do a mile.
Maybe
so
you only want to spend an hour with him. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say about the hiking guide, as far as like all the locations and everything, the one thing I did with the second edition is I contacted all of the stakeholders in all of the locations. So not only are there hiking descriptions, but there's also descriptions of the other amenities at every location, every hike's location. So it'll tell you if there's camping, or if there's cabin rentals, or if there's swimming, or if there's fishing, or if there's, a lot of people like to take their horses, and so there's a lot of equestrian options for a lot of state parks. And so I've mentioned all of that, but also I contacted the key people in each location, the park rangers, the biologists, the conservationists, whoever kind of was most knowledgeable about the trails and the park. And I had them vet all of the information. I had them take a look at the information that I wrote about the synopsis. I had them take a look at the maps and the trail information and all of the biology and the topography and the history of each that's included in these briefs. And so it's not just me contributing to this guide. It's park rangers and staff that are on these trails every single day. And so I think that really helps bring a certain authority to the information that you're going to get in the guide. And I just wanted to mention that.
This has been really great, Edan, to hear all about hiking in Texas. Thanks for coming on the show and sharing all your wisdom.
Sure. Thanks, Richard. I appreciate it.
And for people that want to find your new book, you can obviously go into your local bookstore. You can find it on the Mountaineers website. You can go on Amazon. And you were saying before the show, hopefully it's going to be in the gift shops in state and national parks in Texas.
Yeah,
which I know lots of times I've been in those parks. They have like the best shops and they have some incredible books. So if you're just going through, pick it up there and support the park as well.
Yeah, and you can also get it on my website, and I'll sign one for you and send it to you. And that's edanklepper.com.
Thanks for that, Dan. I'll put links to the Mountaineers website and your website in the show notes so people can find your book. And with that, thanks everyone for listening to this episode of the 10 Adventures podcast. We'll be back next week to explore the world and hear about more epic adventures. Bye-bye. Start planning your own adventure by visiting us at 10adventures.com and listen to other episodes of the 10 Adventures podcast on Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you find your podcasts.